Welcome. I'm Steve Greenberg. I'm the director for the Center for Faculty Development Office for Senior Faculty Affairs, and welcome to what's now the third session of the Faculty Transition webinar series that my colleague Ann Levy started last year and that we're continuing to build as we go. Today's session is titled Health of Your Wealth, Retiring Against the Backdrop of Change. I'm going to introduce our speaker. I'm really delighted to introduce Nora Yousif. Nora received her MBA from MIT Sloan, the wonderful program, and is now financial advisor and senior vice president of the Empower House Financial Group at RBC Wealth Management, where she helps her clients make smarter decisions when it comes to wealth planning and investments. Nora has presented on personal finance and investments for over 350 organizations, including us. We're happy to have her Tufts Medical Center, Signature Healthcare, IRS, Massachusetts Society of CPAs, and countless, I think truly countless private medical practices. Nora also contributes to TV shows like Channel 5, CBS, NBC, Boston, and Yahoo Finance. Nora's been published in CNBC articles and MarketWatch, and her most recent honor, because it's hot off the presses, as being named a 2024 Best in State Top Women Wealth Advisors by Forbes. So we're really delighted to have Nora, and obviously we're delighted to have her talk about a topic that's key to people as they're considering their transitions as they enter into senior faculty years. So with that, Nora, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve, and it's a pleasure to be back. I always so enjoy presenting here at the hospital. And thank you for those of you with your cameras on. That always, as a presenter, makes things more entertaining when I can see your reactions. So thank you for that in advance. So tonight or this afternoon, whatever time you are watching this, we are going to, the goal here is to make you smarter than when you logged on. And I'm going to cover a lot of ground on purpose. It's going to be a bit of a fire hose because the point is I want you to be able to have at least one actionable item you're going to put in place this week. And the point isn't to make you an expert necessarily on all of these topics, but to get you thinking the right way, to get you thinking about what you ought to be paying attention to, and to know what questions you should ask. And if anyone wants to dive deeper or wants a whole second opinion on their whole financial lives, I of course offer that. I understand people may not want to air their private questions in front of everyone. That's understandable. So what I do is, as I've done in all of these, is I offer a complimentary one-on-one session. We can do over Zoom, and just email me. At the bottom of my screen is my email address, and we can schedule that. Okay. All right. So to delve right in, we're going to talk about investments in the context of all the changes that are going on. And where to begin? Change is the word of the hour. There's been a lot of changes. We'll start with inflation. So inflation in the past 2 years has been the boogeyman or public enemy number one, because inflation was all the way up at 9% last summer, and it's come down to 3%, which is good. And that's a result of the government purposely pumping the brakes on the economy to slow things down. And that medicine worked because inflation has come down to in the threes. The target is 2, but released in the threes. We've come a long way down. And that's good for combating inflation, raising these interest rates. We're at 22-year highs, by the way, on interest rates. It's terrible if you're trying to take out a mortgage, which is probably where a lot of your adult children are right now. But it's really good for people who are retiring or about to be retired, because you have an opportunity available to you that 2 decades of retirees before you did not have. And that is to put money in a relatively safer place and not take a whole lot of risk and get some good returns. Because when it comes to investing, there's really 2 ways to do it. You can invest in the stock market, having some ownership and riding that wave, which we'll get into next. And then the flip side is what's considered the more conservative way to invest, which is when you play the bank. You loan money and collect interest. Now, you can loan money to the government and collect interest through a treasury bill. You can loan money to a bank and collect interest through a CD, loan money to a corporation through a bond, or a municipality through a municipal bond. Okay? And right now, rates, as I'm sure you probably have an idea of by now, are over 5%. Okay, so it's a really unique time and special time to lock in these rates while this window of opportunity is here, while we're at these 22-year highs. So what you don't want is any cash you have to have FOMO or any part of your investments that are on you want to be on the safer side to be locked in now, again, while the getting is good. Because that window of opportunity will close eventually. They've been raising interest rates and now they've been holding steady for a long time. And as inflation continues to be tempered, the next phase will be for rates more likely than not to start to go down. And that window will start to close of these 22-year high interest rates. Okay, so the time is now to act and lock in these interest rates. Now, some people say, well, I got money in a money market. Isn't that fine? That's fine for money that you're going to be using in the short term. But longer term, and a lot of cases, it makes sense to lock in longer term, 3 years, 5, 10, maybe even 15 years. But it's money you're not going to need for that long, because money that's in the high money market or money market funds will go down as interest rates go down. Okay, so you just want the key here is you want to lock in for the safer part of your investments now while rates are so high. Okay. Now, other changes that are going on out there, of course, we have things going on like wars and an election year. Now, with wars, as devastating as wars are for humanity, when it comes to investments, when you hear it, you think to yourself, gosh, I'm going to take the money and hide it under a mattress. But I'm going to share my screen here to highlight why it doesn't necessarily make sense to do that. Because with wars, and we've been through them in the past, and we can use past as a reference here. It's no indication or guarantee of future performance, but it's an indicator of how things go. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. See here, this is the S&P 500 since the 1970s to today. And you see the upward trend going in the right direction. This is why people invest in the first place. And all these jagged edges here are moments of time that were scary. There were assassinations or wars or threats of war, 9/11, marathon bombing, scary, scary times, COVID. And you'll notice that those downdrafts really don't last that long. And the market every single time in history has bounced back up to its previous high watermark and continued to go further. Okay. Now, I also want to address the other change, the other elephant in the room these days, and that is the election. We're in an election. In short, don't allow how you feel about politics to affect how you feel about investing. And the reason I actually be positive for the stock market, now there's not enough data for this to be statistically significant, but there are after the presidency's term is the best year for the stock market, and election years is the second best. And looking back to 1928, the pattern has been that the stock market is volatile leading up to the election, leading up to November 5th, because it's uncertainty, okay, and the market likes certainty. And there's a lot of noise, and I'm sure this election will reach a fever pitch noise. But every single time, whether it was Republican or Democrat, Trump or not Trump, controversial election or not a controversial election, the stock market since the 1928 has ended higher for the year than it started, because there's resolve and the market knows whom it's going to be contending with for the next 4 years. Okay, it has answers. There's no more uncertainty. In fact, looking back to the 1950s, the stock market has ended higher during election years than it started 83% of the time. Okay, so take it with a grain of salt, and know that it's not so much about who is the president that's really going to dictate what happens with your investments in your 403b with interest rates. That certainly has rocked the market last year and the year before that. We certainly saw that happen. And as the interest rates go down, it tends to be a positive thing for stock markets. The other thing that affects stock markets are, of course, earnings. And with AI, the advent of AI becoming more and more prevalent, that helps earnings. And thirdly, the economic cycle we're in. And I'll share my screen one last time here to prove a point about where we could be in the economic cycle, meaning are we in an up cycle or a down cycle? Now, the oranges are obviously the down cycles, and you can see that thankfully they don't last that long. Here was the last down cycle in 2022 and part of last year. This little blip is COVID. Here in 08 was the great last recession of 08-09, and then there was the dot-com bubble, the year 2001 and 2002, double dipping there. And in the 80s and 70s, these were the last bouts of inflation. Sound familiar? And so you'll notice that every single time there's been a down market, thankfully, again, it doesn't last long, and it's followed by an up or bull market in blue. And it's looking more and more like we are in the early stages here of the next up or bull cycle. Okay, just to give you some context of where we are, where we potentially could be continuing to go. All right, so one thing I'll say is a lot of people, when the market is volatile, they like to try to time the market and not sure when to get in and when to get out. What I will say, word to the wise, is don't try to time the market. It's more about time in the market than timing the market, because if you miss even the 10 best days of the stock market's performance, if you're looking at just the 500 largest companies out there, or the S&P 500, your returns can basically be cut in half from an average of around 10% to 5%, just because you missed the 5 best days in the stock market. Okay, so word to the wise is not trying to market time, just get time in the market and have quality holdings. So what makes up quality holdings? Well, what you want to do, and all of us are investors. If you have a 403b or 401k, you are an investor automatically. So when it comes to your investments, I'm going to go over the 3 lenses that I look at when people come in and they want a second opinion on what they have, and they send me their statements. Here's the 3 things I look at, and here are the 3 things I challenge you to look at for your own investments. A little homework to do, okay? The first category is to make sure you are diversified, which we all know, not too many eggs in one basket. I know you know what that means, but very few people do that correctly. The other day, a husband and wife came in, and the husband said, "Oh yeah, Nora, we're diversified. We've got 5 funds." And when I looked under the hood, turns out those 5 funds were all invested in the same stuff. Murphy's Law, not the category that's performed the best, but that performed the worst. And so when it comes to diversifying, the key there is you want to have a mix of different categories. So your losers, are outweighed by the winners, and you get more consistent, predictable returns over time, which at MIT, every finance class mentioned modern portfolio theory, which was coined by Harry Markowitz, who won a Nobel Prize for this, which is the closest thing we have to the Holy Grail. I'm not having to take so much risk to get the best returns possible. And so with your investments, you want to make sure you are representative in the main categories, which are large companies, mid-size, small, a little bit of corporate real estate, some international, and then that other edge of the sword, which is the fixed income we talked about previously, the CDs, the bonds, where you're lending money, collecting interest. And the more of that you have, the more overall safer you are. So word to the wise now, a lot of the 403bs at the hospital have target date funds, okay? It'll be a target date fund 2030 that matches up with the year you're going to retire. Just note that those are good starter funds, but as you start to have a lot of meat on your bones, and a lot of you do at this stage, it's important to diversify, because when you look under the hood of those target date funds, it tends to represent really just 3 categories of what I just mentioned. Large companies, the fixed income, the bonds and CDs, and international. And that's it. Does not include the small, the mid, the corporate real estate, and other categories. So that's something to be aware of. Now, when you retire, you no longer have to be, keep your retirement funds in your 403bs. The final resting ground when people retire is called an IRA, individual retirement account, which all your employer plans dump into, and it's attached to your name personally, and you can invest in anything under the sun, not just a limited menu of options available to you through your 403b. Okay, so that's the good news. And for those of you who have some TIAA, and I'm going to make a point to mention this because there's a lot of obviously physicians and faculty here, and that's the demographic that has a lot of TIAA from perhaps a old 401k or 403b you had, an old retirement plan. The thing with these TIAAs is you want to make sure you don't have the type that's a bit of a stick in the mud. And what I mean by that is a lot of people don't realize, but what they have is actually an annuity, meaning, and they didn't realize this, they have an annuity, which means they have to actually actively start the clock on getting the money out of there. Okay, and it takes 9 years to do this, gradually get the money out of this structure, this annuity, so that when you do retire and you want all your money to go into one individual retirement account attached to your name, it can all happen much more seamlessly all at once. But it's a 9-year process, and it's best to start the clock from now. So my advice is if you have a TIAA, call them up and ask them, hey, do I have one of these annuities that takes 9 years to get out? And if you do, ask them to start the clock so it becomes what's called portable, which means you can move it as you would like to when you retire. Okay. All right. So diversification, that's the first lens. The second lens is your risk. Obviously, if you are very risky and you're about to retire, it's probably not a great thing because you don't have as much time as you used to in your 20s and 30s to make up for that lost time if and when the market goes down. And so as you get closer to retirement, you want to be generally more conservative, and that mind shift comes with a proactive change to your investments. And you want to have less of the stock market stuff, and you want to have more of the what's called fixed income, the CDs and the bonds. Okay, so that we have more of a protective allocation, especially now where interest rates are so attractive. Okay, so if you're locking in at around 5%, hey, great, it takes a lot of pressure off of the performance you're trying to get on the stock market side of things, right? And lastly, another piece you want to pay attention to is cost. People don't talk about this enough, but cost is so important. Obviously, the less you're paying, the more you're keeping in your pocket. And so many people come to me and I see their investments and I find they're paying double what they ought to be paying. And so you can find this out just typing in the ticker symbol of your mutual funds into Google, and you can find the cost. Or the analysis I run, I always run just so you show you what the cost you're paying is. It's important to ask the questions, and sometimes there are layers of costs. Okay, so you want to know all total costs. And just to give you an idea, our clients recently were paying about 2% all in. We brought everything down to 1%. And you may say to yourself, a 1% difference, what does that really make? It adds up. Over 20 years, $1 million, 1% difference adds up to about $400,000. Okay, so it matters. So ask about cost and do your best to really keep costs low. All right, other changes that are happening. We talked about the world deglobalizing. I want to mention that. So for people who have international investments, you might want to pause and really consider if you should have so much international exposure when the world is deglobalizing. And thankfully in the US, we don't have food insecurity or energy insecurity. We have plenty of that. And the manufacturing, a lot of it is exiting certain countries. And a lot of it is coming back either to North America, it is particularly India, is in particularly Mexico as it pertains to the Americas. So that's something you want to consider when it comes to your international exposure. You want to make sure there are certain countries perhaps that that may be represented there that you may not want to have represented. Okay, so there's deglobalization going on, there's inflation changes going on, there's wars, there's an election year. What else? Well, there are regulatory changes that have also gone on, as if that all wasn't enough. Now in Massachusetts, we have the millionaire's tax that got put in place last year. Now this applies to anyone earning over $1 million, or if they sell a property and they've got some profits that bring them over the $1 million mark, this applies to you. And it's an extra 4% you have to pay. Ouch. Now, how can you help avoid that? There's a lot of strategies out there. I'll give you a few. And one is you want to bunch up any kind of charitable donations you're making, or use these things called these donor advised funds. So if you have a tax heavy year, you want to do your best. If you're already giving to charity, give to charity, 5 years worth all at once. Okay, so you can maximize your deduction. Another thing is those municipals I mentioned. This is where you're, instead of buying a CD, collecting interest, you loan money to a municipality, say the town of Wellesley, and you collect interest. That's called a municipal bond. And the beauty of those for high income tax earners, I highlight this because it is federal and state tax free. And that means it doesn't count towards your taxable income, which means it helps keep your taxable income under that $1 million threshold, so you don't pay an additional 4% tax on your total income. Okay. And something else. This only applies for 2023, unfortunately, for tax year 2023. But you can file your federal, you can do joint if you're married. And then in the state, you want to file separately. That way, you're not combining your and your spouse's income. And that will, the idea there being, it helps keep you under that $1 million mark. So you can do that with your state tax return, okay, for 2023. As for 2024, they put the kibosh on that. You can't use that strategy, but you can still use that strategy for 2023. All right, moving on. Other things to be doing. Now, as physicians, you're preparing for retirement and you're doing everything right, and that is maximizing your 403Bs. Great. Is that enough? For most of you, it is not, because retirement funds are set up for the average American, and most of you on this call are earning more than the average American and are going to need more than the average American. And so what I encourage you to do is go above and beyond the kind of obvious strategies of maxing out your 403B and for your 457. You can maximize both. What you can also do is contribute to your IRA, individual retirement account. For 2024, you can contribute up to $8,000 if you're over 50, and you can do that for you and your spouse. So that's 16 grand right there. Even if your spouse isn't working outside of the home, you can still contribute on their behalf if you're working. Another thing you can do, of course, is contribute to after tax accounts, of course. And you can do this thing called the backdoor Roth. That's good. It makes it so that you have less taxable income when you retire. That's fine. So you put money in an IRA, and then you do this thing called the backdoor Roth. So you get that money into a Roth IRA, because most of you on this call earn too much to just directly contribute to a Roth. Okay, that's fine. And by the way, that's different than a Roth conversion. Roth conversions are great, and you save this idea as a strategy for you once you do retire, between your retirement date and your when you turn 73 or 75, and that's a new required minimum distribution age where you have to start taking money from your IRA. And the idea is you take money from your retirement funds, and once you're retired, you're at a low tax bracket. So then you gradually, in chunks, convert some of those retirement dollars to Roth dollars. Okay, take the tax hit because you're at a lower tax bracket, and do that gradually every year until you're at that 73 or 75 age where you have to start taking distributions from your IRA. And the point is, you're reducing how much you're forced to take later. Okay, and generally, for me, I green light this for clients. If you can cumulatively save over $100,000, great. Use that strategy. If you do the numbers out and you run the calculation and you can't save over $100,000, I say don't bother. All right. And another tax strategy, and this applies for a lot of physicians, if you're working, doing some locum work, or you're consulting, a lot of you have a consultancy that you started, is using what's called a SEP IRA, an SEP IRA. And it's like an IRA on steroids, because instead of just contributing $8,000 max, you can contribute for 2024 up to $69,000. And so it really just blows the water out with 403Bs and IRAs. So that's really great to do. Again, if you are you're a business owner all of a sudden and you're running your own consultancy and you're the only employee, it's tailor-made for that. Another thing that does is that suddenly you're a business owner and you're availing yourself to what I like to call accounting gymnastics. So basically allows you to itemize and get more deductions. And then you can do really neat things like putting your kids, for example, on your payroll. Adult children or young children or even grandchildren, they can be on your payroll. And for a child, you pay them up to $7,000 a year, okay, when they're a teenager, or you do that for 5 years, max it out, invest that money in the S&P 500. And from the time you do that until they're in their 60s, they will be on their way to becoming millionaires in their own right. So talk about being parent of the year. Okay, it's a really nice strategy. And again, it applies once you are your own business owner as a physician. It's a really nice strategy. All right, so I'm going to shift gears here and continue to move on. As you retire, we talked about your investments. Now let's talk about your income stream. One of your income streams is going to be more than you probably think. And what I'm talking about is Social Security. Social Security is a place where I see people leaving money on the table left and right, and I don't want you to be one of those people. So here's how Social Security works. And basically there are, over 81 different ways to collect, and I can tell you the exact year and month of when you should collect if I knew how long you're going to live, which of course we don't know. But I say, you have a sense of your longevity with your parents, and you have a sense of what your health is, okay? And so I use that as a gauge. Now, if you're in not great health and no one in your family, made it past 72, then I say take your Social Security early, collect it as soon as you can, and that is at age 62, assuming you're retired. But otherwise, like most Americans, we're going to live into our 80s, and thanks to you, health and science is only getting better and better, and medicine's getting better and better. So in most cases, it makes sense to wait. And so your full retirement age, depending on the year you're born, is somewhere between 66 and 67. If you're born after 1960, your retirement age is 67. And if you're born 1954 to between 1954 and 1960, your full retirement age is somewhere between 66 and 67, okay? And that's when you get 100% of what the government promised you to get. And if you wait a little bit longer all the way up until 70, you get an increase in your benefit. And in fact, every year you hold off to collect, you get an 8% increase in pay. So if your full retirement age is 66 and you wait 4 more years until you're 70, the amount you would be receiving is 132% of what they promised you. And it's an automatic guaranteed increase by the government. And I know a lot of you are saying, oh my gosh, will it even be there? For most of you, within striking range, even if rules are changed, you will be still grandfathered in. The Social Security Trust Fund was going to be depleted back in the 80s, and they made a change, and they said, well, people are living longer, so they just changed the full retirement age from 65 to 66 or 67. So likely they'll just continue to make changes like that because we're all living longer. But I'm not really concerned, as some people are, about them getting rid of Social Security entirely, because 40% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck waiting for their Social Security to arrive, okay? So I don't see it going away. It's something worth us talking about. And it is not peanuts. In fact, right now, the maximum someone could be collecting at age 70 today is $4,800 a month. It's a lot more than people realize. And let's attach some dollar signs. If you were to collect at 62 instead of waiting till your full retirement age, the amount of money you could be leaving on the table cumulatively over 20 years, that's about $200,000. And if you were to collect at your full retirement age and not wait until 70, the cumulative amount of money you could be leaving on the table is about $300,000. So let's add it up. If you were to collect at 62 instead of waiting till 70, we're talking about $500,000 you just leave on the table, and that's not including a spouse. That's just you, okay? And I know some of you may be thinking, well, what if I collect sooner? I'm collecting a little bit longer, even though it's a reduced amount, versus waiting until later, get a higher amount, but I'm collecting for less years because I started later. Well, at what point do those ages intersect? Here's the magic number. If you live past the age of 80, okay, assuming your full retirement age is 66, it makes sense for you to wait until 70 to collect your Social Security benefit instead of 62. Okay, if your full retirement age is 67, that magic number is 81. If you live past 81, then you'll be getting more money cumulatively from the government by collecting at 70 versus collecting as soon as you can at 62. Okay, now how does Social Security work if you're married? Any benefits to being married, at least in the context of Social Security? There are. When you're married, you can collect a benefit off of your own working history or an amount equal to his or her half, okay, to half of their full retirement amount. Okay, so either or. Now, are there benefits to being divorced in the context of Social Security? Well, I know a lot about divorce. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst, and a lot of times I'm brought in when people are getting a divorce or thereafter to help ensure if they're going to be okay and how to optimize the outcome of a divorce. And so I run single events for my divorce clients. And so this topic comes up a lot. And for retirees, the rate of divorce spikes during the first 18 months of retirement. So it's that much more important to figure out how you're going to spend your time, okay, for your own mental health and for for your relationship. And when it comes to if you are divorced, if you fall in that camp, Social Security works basically the same way as if you were married, as long as you were married for 10 years, okay? And so when people come to me and they're contemplating divorce, the first question I ask is, how long have you been married? Because if they tell me 9.5 years and it's a safe environment, I'll oftentimes say, wait, to make that 10-year mark, because then you have the same benefits as if you were married. You could collect off of your own earning history or half of his or hers. Okay. Now, if you have multiple exes, like my Uncle Jimmy, God bless him, by his third wedding, we did not buy a wedding gift. Love was just not his forte. He was a hopeless romantic. But if you have multiple exes, assuming you were married for 10 years in each of those, you're also eligible to receive choose one, either off of your own working history or a benefit equal to half of his or hers. Okay. Now, what about for those of you who had children later in life? It's more and more prevalent, especially with women nowadays. If that's the case, if you retire, or not only if you retire, but if you're collecting Social Security, because you can retire and just not touch your Social Security. But if you decide to turn on your Social Security and you still have a child that is under 18 or even under 19, but they're still in high school, your child would be eligible to receive a Social Security benefit equal to half of yours. And what's more is, if your child is under 16, your spouse would also be eligible for a benefit equal to half of your benefit amount or your full retirement benefit amount. Okay, pretty neat, right? And lastly, what if you're widowed? What if you're surviving spouse? Now, here is an area, and this might apply to a parent of yours, perhaps a mother of yours, or an aunt. And I point out the women because, of course, women are living longer. So, and hence why Social Security, there's a lot of strategies, especially available to women because of that. For widows, 8 out of 10 times I find widows more money because the rules, basically, that I just talked about get thrown out the window. For widows, they're super generous. For widows, you can collect not just half of what the deceased spouse was collecting, or the deceased ex-spouse was collecting. You can actually receive a benefit equal to 100% of what they were collecting at the time, or your own benefit. And you can even switch back and forth between the two. What's, I think, the most fascinating thing, anyone want to guess how long you have to be married to be eligible for that widow's benefit or surviving spousal benefit? I saw someone mouth it. 9 months, not 10 years, 9 months. Okay. All right. So moving on from Social Security, it's certainly a lot more fascinating than people give it credit for. Let's talk a little bit quickly about Medicare. Now, here are just a couple takeaways I want you to be aware of when you retire. When you retire, there's an acronym you're not going to like. And that acronym is IRMA. It's your income related monthly adjustment amount. Basically meaning, because you're a high income earner, or we're a high income earner, you're going to pay a premium for Medicare. And that premium can be as much as $500 a month. It's serious money. And the reason there's this IRMA that comes into play, especially for recent retirees, is because there's a 2-year lag. You can retire in 2024, but they're going to look at your income based off of 2022. So if you don't do anything and you're suddenly retired and at a much lower income tax bracket, you're still going to be hit hard with this IRMA premium, charging you an extra, potentially up to $500 a month if you don't do anything. If you do nothing, you have to wait 2 years for that to suddenly go down or go away entirely. But what you should do is be proactive. And what you can do is you can go to Social Security, fill out a form called an SSA Form 44. I can send it to you if anyone needs it. And you can basically say, hey, there's an exception here. I retired, or I'm working part-time now. I'm working way less. And that would force them to readjust what that premium should be. Okay, I did this recently for a client that was paying $500 extra premium. He retired and he said, hey, what the heck, why am I getting charged this? And so we appealed it through this form. You don't have to wait to file your tax returns. You can just submit the form and also add whatever is required with that form. And we were able to reduce his premium from $500 to $200. Still a premium, but you saved $300 a month. So just know you're going to likely be hit with IRMA when you start collecting Medicare. You're not going to like it, but no, you can do something about it. You can be proactive to get rid of it or at least reduce that premium you're being charged. Okay. Another thing about Medicare is if you're contributing to your HSAs, make sure you stop that 6 months before you collect Medicare. And I want to help you with the terminology of Medicare. You can collect A, B, and C, and the C would be Medicare Advantage, or you can collect A, B, and D and collect a supplement or a Medigap. In either situation, if you're married, know that in a lot of cases, it doesn't make sense for you and your spouse to have the same supplement or Part C because you have different needs, you have different doctors. So just know that oftentimes the best deals out there are when spouses have different policies and different coverage in place. And if anybody needs help walking through and navigating through Medicare, just let me walk you through it. Okay. All right. Moving on here in the interest of time, I'm going to talk a little bit about other changes that happened in Massachusetts. And that change was estate changes. Now in Massachusetts, or as I like to say, Taxachusetts, we used to have the lowest estate tax credit, basically meaning we were an expensive state. If we were to pass away, it was expensive. Because what would happen is anything over $1 million, the state of Massachusetts would come in and waive an estate tax on your estate, which is everything, your house, insurance, retirement, everything, before that money drops down to your beneficiaries. Now, we got a bit of a break in 2023. The million used to be the only credit you get as an individual. They increased that limit. Well, they basically doubled it from $1 million to $2 million. Great. And so what I encourage a lot of people to do is get a trust. And the reason people get trusts is so they can double that credit from not just $2 million to now $4 million because you're married and you can both use your credit. And if you already have a trust, here's the thing. Don't think you're all set. I still encourage you to reach out to your state attorney and just send them an email and say, hey, we have these trusts. Are we okay considering the new Massachusetts estate change that happened last year? Because there was basically this thing, I won't get into the details, but there was a little mentioning in that legislation that said things are portable for spouses, meaning just because you have a family trust doesn't mean you're both going to be able to maximize the wife's $2 million credit and the husband's $2 million credit. You have to have special wording. The trust has to have special wording in there so that you can truly maximize your $4 million total credit. Okay. Other reasons people get trust is to avoid probate, but mainly it's really to avoid estate taxes. And if you have a very high estate, or your total estate is over, let's say, $7 million, okay, what a lot of people are doing is they're doing these other kinds of trusts out there called slats or irrevocable trusts. And they're doing these things before the end of 2025, because that's when the Tax Changes and Jobs Loss Act is changing. The Trump tax changes that put in place in 2018, it's expiring at the end of 2025. And what it's going to mean is the federal estate tax is going to go from $13.6 million, which is basically means most people don't have to worry about it. And it's going to lower down back down to 7 million, potentially, if no changes are made. So it's a reason for people who have more than that in assets to really consider strategizing and getting some money out of their estate now while before the changes take place at the end of 2025. Okay. All right. And moving on, I'm going to end off with really 2 more points, and then I'm going to open it up to Q&A. And one is people, I'm a fan of using what you have. A lot of people are sitting on stuff. And a lot of the stuff is oftentimes insurance policies. A client of mine, we'll call her Goldie Hawn and Kate Hudson, the mom being Goldie, the daughter being Kate. They came to me, and the mom had this old insurance policy that she was just sitting on, and it had a death benefit. And she thought to herself, what good is this thing? If I'm gone, I'm not going to see it. And it turns out she got the wrong kind of insurance all along. She should have had long-term care because it turns out Alzheimer's was in her family, but it was too late to get a new policy at this point. And so she had already bought this other straight death benefit policy. And so what I recommended, because we're all living longer and the insurance actuarial tables have changed, is we put it out to bid. And we said, okay, let's take this insurance policy with a $400,000 death benefit. Let's see what we can do with it. And basically what we did is we exchanged it for one that had a larger death benefit, $600,000, which she thought, okay, that's nice, but I still don't need money. She was able to get rid of her premium, okay, because we used the cash value in the policy, so she doesn't pay any more premiums. So we saved a bill, that was good. And most importantly, we added something to the policy that made it a hybrid, that said she could use that $600,000 for long-term care needs should she need it. Okay, so know that something like that is possible. You don't necessarily need to buy new policies, just use what you have. All right. And lastly, I'm going to end off saying it's so important for you to do the numbers out, run your projection on how you look. And word of caution, a lot of the calculators online, their assumptions aren't correct. For example, a lot of the inflation numbers on those calculators online will say 2%, when we all know in reality, as we've seen, you can't use 2% as a long-term inflation input. And garbage in, garbage out. So really important to do run your projection, see how you look long-term to see what you should change, what you should optimize, if anything at all. And I run these for people all the time. I'm happy to do it for you. It's super important that you're seeing, what to change. And really, I like to orient things and ask yourself what's more important to you and prioritize what's important to you. And if your priority is, hey, I want to retire early, okay, let's work backwards and see, how much more you need to save. If a priority for you is leaving your kids enough money for a down payment or keeping 2 homes within your family, great, how much longer do you need to work that? And just work backwards. So it's important to know where you stand so that way you can make some changes if need be. And again, I run these for people all the time. I'm happy to do that. I call them strategy sessions. And let's just see where you stand. And that way you can make changes that are appropriate for you. And you're aligning your wealth with whatever you want to accomplish in life, whether it's early retirement or leaving a certain legacy or just not running out of money. All right. And what I'll end off with saying is really numbers aside. Think about how you're going to spend your time. I find especially with physicians that are at the top of their game and faculty at the top of their game and any professional at the top of their game in their industry, it's really hard going from 160 miles an hour to 0. So I find gradual retirements really do work nicely for a lot of people. And it allows you time to start to think through your next stage of life of how to fill it up with something that is purposeful and that you feel fulfilled and happy. All right. And if I can be a resource to you, of course, I'm happy to. And with that, I'll pause and we'll open things up to a Q&A.
Thanks so much, Nora. We're all applauding in the Zoom way that we can. That was really terrific. You touched on so many really meaty topics. Let me ask one question, then I'll ask a question in the chat. Meanwhile, I encourage people to put their other questions in the chat. I'll start with one that you kind of brought up right at the end, and it's a theme that we talk a lot about in these sessions, which is that retirement isn't either all or nothing. For a lot of people who decide how to give up the stuff they don't want to keep doing, but to keep doing the stuff they do want to keep doing. And it often, there are often salary questions around that where people will accept a reduced salary because they're not doing as much stuff. It may be a very reduced salary, the questions around fringe benefits and so on. But from your standpoint, what does anything change if you're from what you talked about with retirement, if you're partially retiring, how does that affect any of the different things you talk about in terms of Social Security and Medicare and other stuff? Anything change, or is it all pretty much the same?
Yeah, great question. So 2 things. With Social Security, it hardly affects people because Social Security isn't based on your 3 previous years. That's pensions. With Social Security, they use your 35 highest income earning years So in most cases, when people just go part-time, it really does not affect their Social Security. If anything, they may still be replacing lower income earning years. And so minimal effect. Plus, it's the lower income earning years that actually have a higher weighting on the calculation that they use. So in short, it doesn't affect your Social Security. It would allow that to deter you. And know that you can earn up to $1 million after your full retirement age between 66 and 67, and there's no reduction in your Social Security while you're collecting it. Now, for Medicare, just know it's a little different. Once you've been working and you're past the age of 65, which most people are working past 65, and once they finally do apply for Medicare, know that that 7-month window for Medicare doesn't apply to you. For you, you actually have a different amount of time to apply for Medicare and not be penalized. And the key is you'll just need a letter from your employer saying, hey, you've been working and your employer's been covering you for Medicare, hence why you didn't apply for Medicare sooner. And that way you avoid getting any kind of penalty. So in short, no real tangible effect on your Social Security benefits. And for Medicare, when done right, no effect either. You will not be penalized for working later in life.
Great, thank you. We have a question from one of the attendees from Anna. When you say, this is referring back to, I think, one of the first points you made about locking in the higher interest rate. So when you say to lock money at higher interest rates, are you talking more about CDs or more about bonds?
Yes, either category. They're both considered fixed income, which is basically, again, playing the bank where you're loaning money to a bank or a corporation. Now, if you're lending money to a bank, you want to keep it under that 250 FDIC limit number. In fact, I like keeping it under 240 just for the interest sake at a time. And then for bonds, you want investable grade bonds, really quality bonds, because that's your safety vest in the water, keeping you afloat. And you want to make sure it's got good quality on it. And same thing for municipal bonds as well.
Anna, I see you're unmuted. Did that answer your question, or did you want to clarify?
Yes, I think it did answer. Thank you so much. But I was just wondering about the CDs. Most of the CDs, they seem to be shorter term. Like I've seen them like for 18 months. Have you ever seen CDs that are up to 5 years long? Because you mentioned that the interest will go down. So 18 months seems short to me.
It is. And yes, and you can certainly, the beauty is you can dictate how long you want to go. 5 years, 10, 15, they are out there for longer. Feel free to just send me an email and I can direct you to some places. But there are definitely CDs that are being offered for much longer than that. Bonds as well, municipal bonds that are, again, in federal and state income tax free. So the key there is to certainly lock them in. And now is the time to buy the CDs and bonds directly versus having these bond funds or mutual funds. So you can be in control.
Yeah, but this is something that you would rather recommend to someone who is getting closer to their retirement. Someone who is in their, I don't know, early 40s, they would probably still do better with the stock market, right? Because they're not close to retirement.
Yes, and that's why when you're in your 40s, you'll have less of the fixed income and more of the stock market for exactly what you just described.
Yeah.
They're okay to take the risk. They don't mind if it goes down. They've got plenty of time for it to recover. And so it's those who are approaching retirement that will have more of the CDs and bonds and less of the stock market. But even for those in their 40s, that have cash lying around or just money in a money market account or high yield savings account, it's best to lock in for as long as you think you're going to need that money.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. And people, please feel free to enter other questions. I've got another one, and then let me ask mine, and then we have another one. So if you had for for the average Mass General doctor, we all make good salaries. Probably most of us not in the Bill Gates category of salaries. What are the errors that people like us tend to make? What are the things where you see and you say, that's a mistake?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to tax and just assuming that, there's no breaks, I'm just going to pay the piper. When, strategy really ought to be, a lens of strategy ought to be applied. So you are thinking smarter, gifting smarter. Another great gift idea too are these college funds, which are a great place. So basically, they're retirement funds for college, and a lot of grandparents want their legacy to go to the grandkids anyways. They want the money to drop down to the next generation or two. Colleges, you can gift 5 years worth of contributions all at once. So that's 18 times 5, that's 90 from grandma and grandpa. That's $180,000 that high income earners can put all at once into a 529 plan, a college fund that will basically super fund the college for that child, and it will remove that money from your estate, and that's $180,000 per grandchild every 5 years. So the key mistake I see is really just lack of acknowledging what deductions they can take advantage of, getting their correct estate planning, and really just not strategizing and writing themselves off, just thinking, it's no use.
I'm going to read a couple questions from the chat. So one is just asking for clarification on the point that you made earlier about, the question says if you've had, say, 32 years of work built up in your Social Security history, then you stop working or have a low income, don't those additional zeros affect your Social Security? Should you make some effort to work at least some as opposed to having zeros over the next few years?
Yes, and I have a feeling that was a woman who asked that question. I oftentimes hear this from women who took some time to not work outside the home raising the kids. And so if they're at 32 years, then yeah, they're looking to look at 35 and you get a big zero goose egg for the years that aren't filled with anything. So at the very least, I encourage you to work and earn at least $7,000 a year. That's all you really need to count for it to be substantial for Social Security to count towards your record.
I'm going to read another question, and this one's definitely above my personal financial expertise. So I'm just going to read the question right so I don't mess it up. Can you explain who would qualify for the SFA Form 44 to reduce the Medicare IRMA? Why wouldn't everyone submit this form?
Exactly. I don't know why people don't do it enough, and I'm here to spread the word, and you're all here to spread the word to your peers. It's people who have retired or a massive reduction of their income, or lost a pension, or lost a spouse. It really applies. It basically the exceptions are listed on the form, but basically it's any situation that reduces your income. And I ask myself the same question: why doesn't everyone file this form?
So the answer is everyone should. Other questions? We're just about at time. Any last questions people want to ask?
Yeah, if no one has questions, I can ask a question.
Please.
Okay. So I know that a lot of financial planners, they always say that real estate is difficult to invest in, and that stocks and the market is so much better because it's maintenance free. You don't have like all these expenditures. Do you still think that is true for the Boston area, where real estate appreciated crazy high over the past 5-7 years? Do you feel like people should also invest in real estate if they have the possibility?
Yeah, diversification is diversification. And there's a lot of ways to do it. And there's a million ways to climb the mountain towards wealth. So really, it's a matter of what interests you. If you really enjoy real estate and you're not, so long as all your wealth isn't in real estate, as long as you're diversified and you like real estate and you like that kind of project, then there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, you want to buy smart and at the right time and what makes sense. Make sure your cash flow is positive. But no, I'm not at all against real estate. I have a lot of clients that certainly have properties in addition to their investment portfolios.
But now with the very high interest rates, it's not the right time to invest in real estate. Like, people are better off sticking to the market, right?
Well, what I will say is you marry the price point and you date the rate. And the rates will be going down, and what will happen is as rates do go down, they're saying they're going to start to go down this year, and it's look much more appealing next year and into 2026. And so you refi, but the key is really buying in at the right price point.
Thank you.
That was really wonderful, Nora. I think next time we have you back, we want you and we want your Uncle Jimmy. Sounds like a character. So anyway, thank you, both really engaging and really informative. So thanks so much for your time, Nora. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Happy to help.
Thanks, everybody, for attending. Thank you especially, Nora.